Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita with Future Pastimes, and we have been reading Dune, and we are now at the final chapter, and it's a doozy. It is thrilling, it's compelling, it's moving, and I believe it really wraps everything up quite nicely. So the Battle of Arrakeen has concluded, and Paul and his other leaders and the Fedaykin, they have moved into the keep there in Arrakeen, the stronghold where his family had moved into when they first arrived on Arrakis. And it's been looted a little bit by the townspeople, but it's otherwise intact, although it still feels very strange for Paul to be back there. And later when Jessica arrives, she barely recognizes it. She doesn't feel at all like she's been there before. She's not really able to reconcile it. It's just a strange mix of emotions. This was the last place where she was with the man that she loves, but it just doesn't feel like the same place. All of the surviving forces of the Emperor, his retinue, and other hangers-ons are still in what's left of his metallic tent structure, and they're secured there. They can't leave. And Gurney and Stilgar are reporting to Paul, the progress, and they've started getting the sandworms out of the basin. The damage has been substantial to the area, and Gurney even remarks that it's unusual to him to hear an Atreides leader who's more concerned with property damage than with lives. But Gurney doesn't realize that the jihad is really what's more on Paul's mind, and whether or not it can be averted even at this point. That's on a scale of billions of people, whereas a few thousand people who have died here on Arrakeen hardly even is worth mentioning in comparison. But Paul is also, he's at a point now where he still has some blindness to prescience. He's still in a sort of time nexus where he can't quite see what's going to happen. He does get a sort of prescient now message from Alia, where she realizes she's able to communicate with Paul this way, and Paul understands what she's doing, and his knowledge of what she's doing, and his knowledge of where the Emperor is, and all this other stuff that's going on now is still feeding into the mystique of Muad'Dib and the Lisan al-Gaib. And he realizes that, everything that's happening now is just feeding into that. It's even to the point now where he realizes that Stilgar, who was his friend and mentor, is now a creature, as how he describes it. It's somebody who is now in awe of him and will be one of these other countless people who just worships the legend of Paul. And he laments that. He kind of is not happy about that as a development, but he knows there's nothing he can do about it. He wonders if Gurney will fall into that same sort of thing where their relationship is utterly changed because he's the Kwisatz Haderach and everything else that is around it, this whole legend of Muad'Dib feeding into it. But he realizes he needs to wrap things up, and that the real solution here is he has to marry the Emperor's daughter, Irulan, and set up putting an Atreides on the throne. And it's part of his plan. So he sends for Lady Jessica and Chani. He wants them there, and he wants the Emperor and his party brought into the keep there in Arrakeen. So that happens, and in the midst of it, Gurney explains to them that yes, they have no weapons, but he says there's a Harkonnen among them, and Thufir is among them, and Gurney says that Thufir has asked to remain among the Harkonnen, and Paul is like, that doesn't seem right. But Gurney says, I felt like it was best to honor his wishes because if he's still on our side, which I suspect is the case, then it's good to have somebody on that side that we have their ear. He may end up being a spy for us. And Paul is like, that's fine. Let's proceed with this. So eventually what happens is they're brought in, and the emperor, of course, is outraged at what's going on. But Paul quickly makes it clear that he's not really in charge anymore. And what's interesting is he's said that they're all under the protection. He swears as a ducal heir of Atreides, as the rightful ruler of the house. He's given them his word that they're protected. But he also says, you've got Duke Paul's protection, but you don't necessarily have Muad'Dib's protection. So that's a totally different story. That's a Fremen thing. And the Fremen are not part of the Landsraad. They're not one of the great houses. They have their own rules, which they keep. And I'm going to abide by them as well, or as much as I do by the laws of the Landsraad. So he kind of gives himself, I can really do whatever I want here. So let's play nicely. One of the things that happens is he recognizes there's some guild reps amongst the assembled people, and he instructs them to tell all of those ships in orbit, all of the great houses, to hit the road. And the guild they're outraged and like, you can't do this. And then Paul tells them in no uncertain terms, I can destroy the spice, and I will. And I'm thinking about just doing it anyway out of spite. And once I do that, then you guys are over. And the guild, at first, they're like, you wouldn't dare. But then they realize, no, you would. And the repercussions of that would just be too dire for them to contemplate, because they're really, as much as they have prescience, they're very short-sighted. They're always taking the short and easy and safest path. And because of that, they're stagnating, which is really what Paul is realizing. And it's going to be a theme moving forward in the Dune books. And this is really the seed of that, his understanding that humanity is hit a wall. And nothing that the Guild or the Bene Gesserit or anybody else is really going to be able to solve that, but potentially he can solve that. And the ramifications of destroying the spice, even the Bene Gesserit know, that's the key to how they become Reverend Mothers. So it's integral to their power. And Reverend Mother Mohiam, of course, is there. And she and Paul get into it, but Paul shuts her down. He says, you are never going to be able to control me. I am the Kwisatz Haderach. I'm what you hoped and feared I would be. It has come true. And if you go to that place where you as all womankind in the Bene Gesserit order cannot look, are too afraid to look, you will find me there staring back at you. And even the Reverend Mother tries to plead with Jessica, but Paul's like, nope, there's nothing there. At one point, Gurney says, there's a Reverend Mother there who says she's a friend of your mother. And Paul is like, my mother has no friends in the Bene Gesserit, and which is true. But yeah, Paul shows he has the upper hand, and he explains to the emperor that the only way we can have peace at this point is if I marry Irulan. And the emperor is not crazy about this. But at that point is when Feyd-Rautha asserts himself. And there's a nice exchange there where Paul he sees Feyd, and he wants to know if Feyd is a member of the emperor's party, or if he's just hiding and using a technicality to be safe under the emperor's protection. But it's all made moot eventually by the fact that Feyd demands Canley, which is the old vendetta and the rules for how to proceed when you have a formal vendetta between two houses. And they can fight in single combat. That's part of the whole Canley vendetta thing. And Gurney is like, well, you promised me some satisfaction against the Harkonnens, so let me fight him. And Paul is like, Gurney, you think you've suffered more at the hands of the Harkonnen than me? He's like, our victory here is your revenge on House Harkonnen. And besides which, now that it's Canley, I'm the only one who can fight this battle. It must be between us. And Jessica is also trying to talk Paul out of it. She's like, there's easier ways to deal with this, but Paul wants to fight Fade. And Jessica realizes it's similar to, Leto's father who died bullfighting. He had this sort of stubborn desire to just do things his way. And so she tells Gurney, look, let it go. You only distract him at this point. It's got to play out. And Paul, he realizes that, that he's not sure how this is going to turn out. He's not even been able to get past that blackness of the vision. And he thinks maybe this is it. It's what happens here that's going to determine, whether or not. So there's no guarantee. He knows that, live or die. If he dies, the Fremen will say he sacrificed himself. And if he lives, the Fremen will say nothing can stop Muad'Dib. And so he's warming up to the idea that the jihad can't be stopped. So he and Fade, they get into it. The Emperor offers up his own knife, which, of course, the Fremen had confiscated, but they give it back to him. And Paul uses his own crysknife. The two of them get into a fight, a knife fight. But Fade has a hidden poison needle in his attire, which nobody else knows about. So he's very confident. He realizes he has fought in so many arena battles, but we know from earlier that they're always a little bit lopsided. They were never a fair fight. But everybody looking at Paul, he takes off his still suit and he's skinny. You can see his ribs. He's wiry, but Fade has got more muscle on him. He's a bigger guy. So the Emperor is like, yeah, I think that this could do it. And Fade is like, if I kill Paul, I probably will get to marry Irulan. And now that I'm the Baron, because Baron Harkonnen is dead, Alia explains, yes, I killed our grandfather. And she's now out looking for wounded Harkonnen and Sardaukar to just kill and put out of their misery and mark them so their water can be claimed by the tribe. But now we're at the knife fight, and it's long. It's about as long as some chapters earlier in the book. Very detailed, very tense, so well written. And there are feints within feints and plans within plans. Turns out that the Emperor's blade had a soporific on it, which when you cut somebody with it, it starts to make them, sleepy and weary and slows them down a little bit, but it's not detected by a poison snooper because it's not poison. But Paul gets cut at one point and he realizes that there is a soporific, but he's able to adjust his metabolism using his Bene Gesserit training. And he returns the favor by cutting Fade, who feels that there's something on Paul's knife. And he's like, he's poisoned me. And Paul's like, nah, it's just a little bit of acid to counter your soporific. So he lets them, he's letting everybody know he knows what's going on. But Fade has been very cleverly doing a lot of fake outs. He's been doing strikes. They're fighting without shields. And if you remember when Paul fought Jamis, he was always slow on the attacks because he was trained for so long fighting with shields, and you have to have the slow attack in order to get through the shield. So Fade does one of those, which Paul is like, oh yeah, he's got the same problem I had. But then on the next strike is when he's able to cut Paul. So Paul's like, oh no, he's good. He faked me out with that one. And he's always switching his hands, and it's very hard to keep track of where the knife is. And then just the way that he is positioning himself with one side always facing Paul begins to worry that there might be a hidden mechanism in his attire that would hold like a poisoned needle. And so he's trying to stay away from that side, but it turns out that the poison needle is on the other side. So Fade has been doing another fake out, and eventually they get tangled up, and the poison needle comes out, and it's close to getting him, and they flip down onto the floor with Fade over him, and he's trying to maneuver the needle, which will freeze up his muscles momentarily, long enough for Fade to be able to kill him. but not enough presence there. It won't be detected afterward. And so he realizes it. But before the fight started, Jessica had mentioned to Paul that there was a good likelihood that fate had been conditioned by the Bene Gesserit with a stun word, with a power word that could be spoken, and if he hears it, his muscles will freeze up. And it's the same sort of effect. And she even tells him what the word is, but Paul is like, I don't want any advantages over him. And as he's there, struggling with fate on the floor and about to die, he realizes, I could say that word and that would give me the advantage, but he says out loud, I will not say it. And it was just such an unusual thing and Fade was not expecting. He was a little bit surprised by it, and he shifted his weight just enough that Paul could flip things around, and he sticks the knife right up through Fade's jaw and into his brain and kills him. And so Paul explains to the emperor, well, your little party there is down by one. And they get down to details, and Paul explains that the emperor is going to be exiled to Seleucus Secundus, his old prison planet, and he'll have a throne there when he can rule the planet. But he's going to be giving up his entire Chome shares, which will make Paul filthy rich, and he will marry Irulan. And Irulan is very instrumental in convincing her father to just accept the terms. She says, look, finally, here is a man who is worthy to be your son. And the Reverend Mother also, she's like, look, the spice must flow, is essentially what she's telling him. He will destroy the spice if we don't just give in. He has all the cards, all the chips. We have nothing. We have to limp along. And so the emperor relents. And Chani is there, and she's like, well, you want to marry Irulan, that's fine. I'm not going to stand in your way. But Paul is like, no, you don't understand. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to technically be the concubine. She's like, I don't want a title. He's like, it's not like that. What's going to happen is I'll be married to Irulan, but that's going to be in name only. I'm not going to have a relationship with her. I'm not going to share her bed. I'm not going to have children with her. You are really my wife. And Lady Jessica reinforces that. She herself was a concubine, but she was the Duke's true love. And she says, look, she'll have the title of wife, and we'll have the titles of concubine. But when history looks back on this, they're going to consider us the wives, not them. And that's the last line of the book, the narrative. There's some appendices with a funny little story about Liet Kynes' father joining the Fremen and the glossary. And I'm not going to go into all that, but that's how the book ends. And so it's like I said, it's a pretty thrilling conclusion to the novel. Paul gets his revenge. It's a little bit bittersweet, he knows, because the Reverend Mother is like, you can't let the Fremen loose in the rest of the Imperium. And Paul is like, he's like, I can and I will. This has to run its course. I guess I will mention there was another thing. So after Paul kills Fade, the Emperor, as a last-ditch effort, tries to get Count Fenring to kill Paul. And when Paul sees Count Fenring for the first time, he doesn't know who he is, but he senses something really unusual, and he's afraid. And he's like, why should I be afraid of this man? But it's somebody in all of his prescient visions that he's had, where he's seen the Emperor and he's seen things unfolding. He's never seen Count Fenring in any of them. And Jessica tells him, that's Hazimer Fenring. He's very dangerous. He's a killer. And so Paul, and then she explains that he was a contender, or actually Paul realizes that that's what it is. She explains he's a eunuch, and Paul realizes that he was a Kwisatz Haderach, almost could have been, but he had some defects in his genetics that prevented him from becoming the Kwisatz Haderach. But he sees him almost with like a kinship, and he looks at them with a like, somebody else who maybe understands a little bit of what I'm going through. And Fenring recognizes that, and that is the moment where he realizes he's not going to attempt to kill Paul. And it's a really interesting moment, and the Emperor actually slaps Fenring or punches him and says, well, you should do this. And Fenring is like, we've been friends for a long time, so I'm just going to forget that you did that, but I cannot do what you asked me to do. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting moment. I think Fenring is as a character I would love to have seen more about. Now, he does show up in the Extended Universe books, but the focus there is just on his scheming and assassination and his deadly skills to just kill people. There's less of a focus on his genetic upbringing and that whatever kinship that Paul felt with him. That element never really explored that much, but I would love to have seen more about Fenring from Frank Herbert's POV. But yeah, like I said, everything wraps up, I think, pretty well. But what happens here is that a lot of people, when they finish Dune, they walk away with like, hey, it was a happy ending, and there's not a lot of emphasis on the jihad and what happens there. Frank Herbert he's got it as an undercurrent of what is going on. It's in the subtext. It's something that Paul fears, and in the end, we realize it's going to happen. And a lot of people, their takeaway is like, great, Paul was victorious, and he's going to be the emperor now, and Arrakis is going to become a paradise with flowing water and forests and whatnot, but some desert so that they can keep having some spice, and everything's going to turn out great. And Paul is the hero. And Frank was trying to build up this notion that despite his success, despite the revenge, despite getting presumably everything he wants, he's still not really the hero because of everything else that happens. All of this hero worship that grows out of his success as a Fremen leader and as becoming Muad'Dib and as becoming the Kwisatz Haderach and becoming the emperor, all of that still doesn't equal he is the hero. And that is what led him to write Dune Messiah. Like I said, at some point I may get into reading that. I encourage you to go ahead and just read it. But it was presented and written as an antidote to this notion that Paul is the hero. And so when you read it, knowing that is where it's going with it, it makes a lot more sense, and you'll probably enjoy it more going in. Well, I guess, but if Villeneuve makes a third movie that is centered on Messiah, we'll do a read through of that. Now, in terms of adaptation, of course, this chapter has been adapted in all three versions. Presumably, I'm sure that the Villeneuve one will adapt most of what's in here. So let's go, movie by movie. We'll start with the Lynch movie. So everybody's in there. A lot of that is in there. There's no Count Fenring character, of course, in the Lynch movie. And then, of course, there is what was in the theaters and all of the unofficial extended versions. So there's an extended version where Thufir comes forward, and Paul, as in the book, says, for all of your years of service, Thufir, you can ask anything of me. And he says to him, you can even kill me if you can have my life if that's what it takes. And Thufir is like, no. In the book, he's like, I just wanted to, serve my Duke, and the residual poison is about to overwhelm him. He's been given a poison needle by the Emperor and told, go kill him when you get a chance. But he's like, here it is, and no, I'm not going to do it. Now, in the Lynch movie, he has a heart plug installed, which apparently everybody on GD Prime has installed, which was a Lynch thing. It was not part of the book. And so he's handed a knife by Fade and said, go kill him. And Thufir's like, no, I will not do it. And he drops the knife and he pops his heart plug and dies, and Paul has him carried away. And so fairly close. Thufir doesn't really play a role after the halfway mark in the miniseries, so that part was not adapted in the miniseries. You do have of course, the knife fight between Paul and Fade. Plays out pretty closely in the Lynch movie. It's very, very cool. It's a nice, well choreographed fight. It's pretty decent in the miniseries as well. I think the Lynch movie did a better job. I am looking forward to the Villeneuve one. I think it probably will end up being the best one. We've seen bits and pieces of it in the trailer, so we know that part happens. One of the things that happens in the book, of course, is that Raban is killed sort of off screen. They just said Raban is dead, and that's really all we get out of that. In the Lynch movie, when the Baron is brought before the Emperor, Raban's head is sitting on a plate at the bottom of the steps leading up to the throne. Presumably, he was killed at the order of the Emperor. In the miniseries, the townspeople in Arakeen, the Fremen there, corner Raban, and they take his head. It appears as if he and Gurney are going to be fighting it out in the Villeneuve movie. Whether Gurney gets to kill him or not remains to be seen. We don't know how that's going to play out as of this recording. It'll be interesting if he does get to kill Raban, because Raban is really his number one nemesis. If he gets to kill Raban, then there's really no reason for him to demand the opportunity to kill an important Harkonnen, as he does here in the book. So I don't know that we'll see that part of the scene. We still don't know about Count Fenring, and it's such a minor element. It'll be easy for them to just omit it. While there was a Count Fenring in the miniseries, he was just sort of somebody for the Emperor to talk to, and that was it. He didn't go to Gidi Prime. He's not really a factor in the end there. We do have the same outcome where he marries Irulan in all of the adaptations. The line that ends the book, where Jessica says to Chani, "History will call us wives," was filmed for the Lynch movie, but that's not how the Lynch movie ends. It ends with it's suddenly raining, and never a drop of rain on Arrakis. But suddenly Paul makes it rain, and Alia says, "How is this?" Well, for he is a Kwisatz Haderach, as if that was something that the Kwisatz Haderach would be able to do. So a little bit unusual. A lot of the book fans were like, "What in the world was that?" Has nothing to do with anything. How? Anyway. So that's how that one ends. The scene, they filmed that scene, but they didn't use it. The miniseries does end with the same line that the book ends with. I'll be really interested to see if they end the Villeneuve adaptation. I feel like there will probably be a little bit more going on in the resolution there, but who knows? Who knows how that's going to play out? I look forward to it. We're about a month and a half or so away from finding out. So, of course, we'll do a video that talks about that. So, if you've been reading along, let me know what you thought of the conclusion, the last chapter of the novel Dune. Did it live up to your expectations? I was very satisfied with it. It's one of the longest chapters, possibly the longest chapter in the book, so it is good, especially in light of the fact that the actual details of the battle, not really covered. This was very much hey, there's going to be a big battle. Whew, that battle was great. So in those terms, very unsatisfying. But there was a lot of other stuff, and how much of describing sandworms crashing down and Sardaukar running away. I mean, I guess if Frank had decided to actually do it, it would have been great. But he didn't feel like he needed to get into those details. He's like, let people picture how they think it turned out. We say what happens, but we don't really go into a ton of detail. He had bigger fish to fry, I guess. But that is it for this. Thank you so much. If you've been reading along, the handful of you who may have, let me know what you thought of that experience. Did you actually read and watch a video and then wait, to read the next chapter? Or were you just watching it for the heck of it? what motivated you? Why are you watching this? That's what I want to know. Or did you find any of it useful? Was there stuff that you still don't understand? Let's get into that and talk about it. It's a dense book, to be sure. There's layers and layers and layers. There's stuff within stuff within stuff. Frank Herbert was a genius at doing that. It's the sort of book that you can read multiple times and discover more and more each time you read it. And as you read other books in the Dune series, and I certainly recommend that you read them all, even the extended universe stuff, it's good because it gives you some insight into other elements of the Imperium, what's going on there. There's some interesting characters. They're interesting stories. The writing style in the extended universe books is completely different, and you just have to accept it's not written by Frank Herbert. They didn't even attempt to try to write like Frank. It is devoid of any philosophy and insights and bigger questions. It's just action and dialogue. But there, again, like I said, there are some interesting stories on there. The dialogue is hit and miss. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's okay. Nothing quite as quotable as the stuff that's in the real Dune novels. But as you read through the other things, you will start to realize there was more world building packed into Dune, but it becomes clearer the more you read some of the other books. So the idea of prescience and the idea of what was Paul talking about with the stagnation of humanity, what was he going to try to do about it, if he could do anything, and where does it go? And that really becomes a central theme moving forward. But the seeds of it are here in this book. And as you read those and then come back and reread this one, you grasp a lot more and you get a lot more out of it. And so it's the hallmark of a great book in that it can continue to surprise you and educate you. And there's a lot of interesting philosophical concepts to explore in all of the books, but this one in particular. So I hope you have enjoyed reading it. I hope that these videos have helped you to grasp some of what's going on. I'm making some assumptions of my own, so I'm not a Frank Herbert scholar, but I know a lot about Dune, so I'm doing my best. But thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.